Comic book fans, Anchor Pete here, and I'm with my good friend Brian. How you doing tonight, Brian?
Doing good, Pete.
Yes. How
Where's
is
your
everything?
Robot Man helmet?
I know. It's such a disappointment, right? Last week I went all in as Peacemaker. You give me
Just
time, I'll probably have.
call your Peacemaker helmet gold.
There you go. Or I could just cut a piece of it, just put it over my eye, right? And I could be Cyborg.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah. Believe me, this show definitely does evoke some creativity. This is a very unique show. We are, of course, talking about Doom Patrol, which is the HBO Max show. Season 3 has already ended. Is there going to be a season 4?
I do not know, but I hope so because I haven't watched. I've only watched the first 2 episodes of season 3 so far.
Okay.
But I just forgot how much I love this show. Because it's such a weird show. It's such a weird, different show from like anything on TV.
Yep. That's my exact thoughts I had too. Brian and I decided to cover Doom Patrol because there's a little bit of a gap between where Peacemaker ended and when Moon Knight begins at the end of March. So we're like, what show are we going to cover? And Brian had the great idea of covering Doom Patrol, which makes me so very happy because it is essentially based on the stories created by Grant Morrison, who is one of my all-time favorite comic book writers of all time. I just love Grant Morrison. Yeah. And Brian, what did you know about the Doom Patrol prior to Grant Morrison writing the book in the 80s?
Prior to Grant,
or maybe it's the 90s.
No, it's 80s. It's 80s.
Yeah,
very little, honestly. I might have had some inkling about them because of the similarities with X-Men.
Yes.
But although this came first, so
yeah,
that's probably it, honestly.
Yeah, so I think we should go into detail about that because that's super exciting to me. The Doom Patrol comic came out the same month as the X-Men comic, but it came out first. And there's so many similarities between the two. I mean, the teams essentially are both teams of like people that you would consider to be like freaks or outcasts, and they both have leaders that are rich men that are in wheelchairs, older men that are in wheelchairs. Over time, Professor X and, of course, the chief, Niles Calder, we kind of learned that they've sort of done some diabolical things to kind of, go along with their vision. And there's just some similarities between the two groups so much. One thing that kind of separates the Doom Patrol comic from the X-Men comic, I guess you could kind of say the X-Men do this too. The Doom Patrol are one of 2 DC teams that die pretty frequently. Like, and of course, X-Men die, right? But with the Doom Patrol, their name certainly fits because the team the main characters die often and come back to life,
Yeah, but I think with Doom Patrol is that they kind of kill off the characters with the series and then bring it back years later, things like that. Whereas X-Men characters kind of just like die individually and then come back in a couple months.
Right, exactly. And so the other team, just if you guys are curious, the other team is the Metal Men, and they get killed off all the time too and brought back to life all the time too. But Brian, do you remember who the original team of the Doom Patrol is, like in the comics?
Yeah, it's actually fairly similar to what the roster is in the show. So it's Elastigirl, it's Negative Man, it's Robot Man, Beast Boy actually, and then I want to say Mento.
That's right.
And the Chief, of course.
Yes. And what's so cool about this show and just the Doom Patrol in general is that they've been around in other media too. We're called Comic Books Transformed, and we talk about the adaptations of the comics that we love, whether they're made into cartoons or TV shows or movies. And the Doom Patrol, they've been in the Teen Titans cartoon, and in Teen Titans Go, And so they
Teen Titans Go?
Yeah. There was a really messed up episode that was like a Thanksgiving episode, and it was Beast Boy going with the Doom Patrol.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm gonna have to look that up. I don't think I knew that. But I feel like I would buy it more if it was the original Teen Titans cartoon, or I don't know if it's the original, the one from the early 2000s.
Yeah.
But Teen Titans Go, that's very surprising. It's a little more comedic, I guess.
Yeah.
Very different show.
Yeah, well, they're on the last season of the Teen Titans cartoon, the original one from the 2000s. And
Okay, I'm gonna have to watch both of these because I didn't know either of those things.
yeah, and just to go along with our comparison to the X-Men, the main adversaries that the Doom Patrol face in the comics are the Brotherhood of Evil. And it's like, oh, the enemies of the X-Men are the Brotherhood of Evil mutants, you know? And so in the Teen Titans cartoon, the Brotherhood is like the main enemies of their last season.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the Brotherhood too, because they show up in season 3 of Doom Patrol, and they kind of have been sprinkled throughout the show a little bit so far. But I figured, Brian, we could just start off by talking about the individual characters and like what's happened to them over the course of the show. Is that cool?
Sure.
All right. So I got a question for you right off the bat. Out of all the characters in the cast, who's your favorite?
Oh man. This is actually easier than I made it initially seem. I'm gonna say Jane.
Okay.
I'm real hooked on the personalities and the underground stuff.
Yes.
I feel like that always interests me the most. I really like every character though. Like I can't say a bad thing about any of them.
Yeah. You know what? You actually picked the same one as me. Jane's my favorite as well. Diane Guerrero. I know I've seen her before, but she is incredible on this show. Just the way that she can play all the different personalities. Like, because the show is on a streaming service and because it's this sort of obscure comic book title, she's completely overlooked for any kind of awards and stuff. But her acting ability is like, she's on another level.
Yeah, totally agree. Just the personality switching. I mean, she plays some very, very vastly different characters often. She even plays versions of characters that occasionally look different.
Right.
So, like, you know, another actor puts an imprint on it, but she has to kind of channel that as well. Yeah, she's absolutely fantastic, and I think it's pretty up there for the most interesting storyline overall in the show to me.
Yes. Now, she's not an original Doom Patrol character. I believe that she was created for the Grant Morrison run, and it kind of makes sense because she's a very Grant Morrison type character. I mean, essentially, just for people that aren't familiar with her, Jane has multiple personalities, and it's because of a trauma that she experienced as a child. And on the show, they explain it that those personalities were sort of experimented on by scientists. And so the personalities have different superpowers. So when she becomes a different person, she has a different power. And they're all weird, random powers. You know, there is like one that can teleport. There's like Silver Tongue. When she says things, the words actually kind of form into metal, and then she can like throw the metal at. I think that's so cool.
Yeah.
Then there's Hammerhead, the Secretary. She has all these different personality types, and they're so different. I was actually really impressed when she played this character called Baby Doll, right?
Baby Doll, yeah.
Yeah. Like her voice, I'm pretty sure that's Diane Guerrero doing the voice, and she like truly sounds like a little kid. It's kind of eerie.
Yeah. Absolutely some great overlooked range here.
Yeah. She her story usually tends to be almost kind of on the side from the rest of the Doom Patrol characters, and it's always kind of like this more dramatic, more adult kind of story. And you know, she doesn't necessarily always get roped in with the hijinks with the rest of the group, but often she can like come in and save them too.
Yeah, I definitely feel that her stories tend to kind of run parallel to the main story. But yeah, she often does. She probably is the most powerful member of the overall of the group.
Yeah.
And she does often come in and save the day. But I mean, she gets saved sometimes too. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the whole team has had to go rescue her, and the cool thing about her is that her subconsciousness is like an underground train station, and all these different personalities interact with each other in the underground train station. And then when it's time for one of them to take over, they essentially like kind of rise up to the surface and switch out. And it's been like a safety mechanism, you know, for this little girl that was molested as a kid. Yeah. She is one of those characters on the team where she ran into Niles Calder. He found her and he took her in essentially, just like Professor X taking in his mutants. And each character is like damaged, but because of their damage, they have special abilities. So which one of those other special abilities characters you want to talk about next?
Wait, of Crazy Jane's or
of the rest of the Doom Patrol?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm gonna go with my second favorite character, which is Robot Man.
Brian, we're in the same freaking order, man. Those are my two favorites.
I mean,
I've been
I
gabbing
don't know
on.
how you could watch this show and just not root for Brendan Fraser to make like a massive comeback.
Oh, I know.
I have missed Brendan Fraser so much. I didn't even realize it. He disappeared for a very long time. He's. I think the recurring theme here is that everyone is a very damaged character and has a very tragic past, and they were all kind of like scooped up by the chief into this kind of little living space. And I think another recurring thing is kind of the longevity of life that all these characters have, because they've all been around for many, many decades. I think in the pilot alone, like 20 or 30 years passed.
At least.
Since they after Cliff joins Rita and Larry.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he was a guy who was a NASCAR driver, kind of like a rednecky guy, and he got into a really bad car accident, and the chief saved his brain and rebuilt him into a robot. Yeah. And I honestly have to just reference that pilot overall. The pilot of the first episode of the show, the pilot was probably one of the best pilots I've ever seen in my life. It completely went from something that I barely knew anything about. I was just watching for the sake of watching it. Yeah. Because I knew, Grant Morrison. I know of the characters from the comics a little bit, and I knew, Grant Morrison had a lot to do with it. And it completely gripped me in that episode. It was like a movie to me, writing wise, maybe not effects wise, but writing wise and character development and all that. Absolute, like, one of the best things I've seen for a first episode.
Yes, I agree. When I look at the production quality of this show, I'm often like blown away. I'm like, wow, it looks so different from what you would expect from like a genre show. I mean, just the setting of the show itself, right? It takes place in the chief's mansion, and it kind of has that sort of haunted house feeling. And you don't really expect that with a team of superpowered people be living in a place like that. It often looks like a horror movie, but it also is kind of like over the top with fantasy type things. I mean, in that pilot episode that you just referenced, it's so absurd, and the show itself can be completely and utterly absurd often. And like the end of the episode ends with like a donkey like farting, right? Is that like fucking big? The donkey
that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, and like, doesn't its gas like spell something? Or I can't even remember the pilot now.
Yeah, and that was all the villain of the first season, Mr. Nobody. Which is a very unique villain and a very unique premise for the show. And I mean, he was only in season 1. I don't think I think it was just season 1. But yeah.
He's referenced in season 2, and he was played by Alan Tudyk, and he's incredible. He breaks the fourth wall, which is kind of funny. He like references the HBO, or I think it was DC universe at that time. When it was
DC universe at the time, yeah.
Yeah, and he references Grant Morrison and stuff. It's great. He breaks the fourth wall. But yeah, the show is just like so unique in the sense of like it can be super absurd, and it just looks completely different. Yeah, and that pilot was fantastic. With Cliff, though, I gotta say that he curses a ton. Robot Man just like says fuck like every 2 minutes.
Well, you know what? I think everybody curses a lot, really, but I mean, I would say that with Cliff and Jane take the cake there.
Yes. And that's the problem, because I often watch these shows, in my living room while I'm like exercising or doing my laundry. My wife and my kids might be around, and they'll just hear this dialogue where they're just like, this is so fucking stupid, fuck. They'll just say it over and over again. And it kind of lowers, if to an outsider, I think it makes the show look juvenile, but it's just that's kind of part of their personality, And I think that with these HBO Max shows in general, they try to be as, like push the envelope as much as possible, just because it's like, oh, we're streaming, we could do whatever we want,
Yeah, I totally agree. And we can't talk about Jane and Cliff without talking about their like incredible friendship, which I absolutely love. It's a completely platonic friendship, and they're just two kind of outcasts that are kind of more on the rebellious side that kind of like bonded, and I absolutely love it, and it's one of my favorite parts of the show.
Yes. I mean, in his accident, at first you'd believe that like his wife and his daughter who's like, I don't know, 2 or 3, die in this car accident in the very first episode. But then it's revealed that the daughter lived and that she's grown up to be an adult. And Brendan Fraser just does this fantastic job. Yeah, he is always cursing and complaining, like I said, but he acts like this father figure to Jane. And that relationship is really great because he's always taking care of her and always kind of looking out for her. And when he's very low, she's always there to support him too. And like really, the show itself is not really like a superhero show. They do kind of have like adventures, but for the most part, it is people just kind of dealing with like depression and like horrible self-image, just like kind of dealing with their own issues. It's like every episode. It's just like dealing with their own personal issues.
Yeah, the core of this show is just broken people dealing with their trauma.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and it's really fantastic.
Yeah, you'd think after 3 seasons it would get kind of old, but it's not. You know, and
no,
I think
they find new ways to reinvent it every time. You know, there's always some new aspect of it that they haven't touched on before, or something they can just rehash into something unique and interesting.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And so I think probably the most melodramatic out of all of them is the Negative Man. That's kind of ironic, right? His name is Negative Man. His Larry Trainer is the character's real name. And then the actor is Matt Bomer, who I had just kind of recognized from Magic Mike. And I think he was on that show. It was called like, not Suits, but it was like White Collar, I think.
Yeah. It was like a USA show or something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And he's a real charming,
good looking guy. Green
guy.
Lantern once too, in one of the DC animated movies. I think.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, it's funny because they cast this like really good looking, charming guy, but then essentially it's just his voice, right? And there's another actor covered in bandages. Every so often they'll show him without bandages on, but then he has this like just horribly burned like purple body, you know.
Yes, and obviously the same for Cliff Robot Man. Obviously that's not Brendan Fraser in that suit. That's another actor.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? Is that both actors, for what they're doing, vocally, it has such an effect, because as Cliff, he's just always like kind of whining and complaining, and it's just funny. And then with Larry Trainer, he's got this sort of quiet, withdrawn kind of way of talking, and he's almost like a ghost of a person. And you just kind of always feel sorry for him, and it's very clear you can feel that he just has this incredible guilt. Because one of the things about Larry is that he's a homosexual, and he was, a regular person in the 60s. He was a pilot. And, of course, back then, being a homosexual was looked down upon, and you couldn't even be in the military and stuff.
Wasn't it the 60s? Wasn't it earlier than the 60s?
Oh, I thought like his test flight was, well, whatever. It's like 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
And he had a wife and kids, and he's essentially like in the closet. And so horrible things ended up happening to his family because of his accident and because of him keeping secrets. And so his family has kind of paid the price for it. And you can just always tell by the way he talks and what he does. He's just always feeling that guilt and that remorse,
Yeah, and then he eventually will try to reconnect with some remaining members of his family, and it doesn't go as planned, really.
Yeah. Just more misery on top of misery,
Yeah.
So so we covered like the main 3. No, we did not cover the main 3 because we didn't talk about Rita.
Yeah.
So were you familiar with April Bowlby before this show?
I knew she was from 2.5 Men, but I didn't really watch that show.
Right.
But that was really the only thing that I was aware of her being in.
Right. And I mean, on that show, I know they had like a lot of gorgeous women on it, and they were kind of objectified or whatever on that show. And she is an incredibly beautiful woman. But it's so interesting because they like play that into her character, right? Because she plays this actress, Rita Farr, that was around from like, the early days of cinema. And she always talks in this sort of melodramatic, over the top, old fashioned kind of way of talking. But
Which is
she
very
appeared,
different from how she talked on Two and a Half Men.
oh, right, right,
Like
right.
an airhead, sort of.
Right. And so she, she's super old, but yeah, she looks like she's like in her 20s or so, or maybe 30s. But she was exposed to some kind of like what, like toxic gas or like mutagen kind of stuff in a swamp.
Yeah, she fell in filming the movie. She fell in like swamp water, and she came out and she was like a blobbish character. And
Yeah,
it seems her form is kind of based on her own kind of self-worth and self-confidence, which
yeah,
is her main struggle throughout her life. Is she just, after that moment, she she kind of lost her confidence. But she also had trauma before that too, which is based on how she got into acting, and what her mom like slept with the producer to get her a role, and that's kind of always kind of dragged behind her.
yeah. Like kind of the stuff that the whole Me Too movement is based on. That whole idea of like, producers using their power and women having to do things they don't want to do to get roles. That's a big part of her origin. Because that's like she was in that system where it was just like commonplace. Like a term that people use all the time with superhero movies now, modern superhero movies, and in general, anytime someone has some kind of issue with their body or physical issue, they use the term body horror. And I don't think that with Rita, her stuff would necessarily be considered body horror, at least in my opinion. I don't think it's like scary. I just think they make her very gross, like all the stuff that happens to her. And it's this crazy juxtaposition, because it's like this very proper, beautiful woman, but then like her face just starts kind of melting like a candle, and she turns into a blob.
Yeah.
Just like it's jarring. Sometimes like she'll do stuff or you'll see stuff and you'll kind of lose your appetite. At least I do when I watch it.
Yeah, I'll totally agree with that. Yeah, mainly when her face starts drooping and all that, it is very and the effects are really good with it.
Yes, yeah. And then that brings us to the last main cast member, Cyborg. Which are you glad that they went with Cyborg for the show versus Beast Boy?
I think about this a lot because Cyborg in the comics was never part of the Doom Patrol.
Right.
Obviously, this show ran concurrently with the Titan show, although they're not the exact same continuity. Right. So I don't know. I'm not sure if it would be better to have Beast Boy or better to have Cyborg. I mean, they've definitely made him interesting, but
yes,
and him having similar issues to the other characters where he had a traumatic event and he's kind of haunted by it, and issues with his dad and all that, and it kind of fits well, but at the same time I feel like his stories seem the most out of place at times compared to the others,
right?
And I mean, maybe it's because he's the youngest. He's probably the only one that would age normally out of the entire group.
Right.
And then it hasn't lived for 60 plus years.
Right.
I mean, even there's another character that's sort of a main character that doesn't come around until season 2, Dorothy. I mean, she looks like she's 12 or 11, but she's 103 or something like that.
Right. That's right. Yeah, we should talk about Dorothy in a second too. But I was going to ask you, essentially with Cyborg, besides the comics, right? Cyborg, you have the Teen Titans cartoon version of him. You have the Zack Snyder Justice League version of him. And then you have this version of him. Would you put this version of Cyborg at the lead as the best one?
It's hard because I feel like he fills different roles in each of those iterations.
Yeah.
I mean, the cartoon version is obviously much more comic relief based, even on a comedy show.
Yeah. Right.
The movie version is much more. I feel like the tech there is much more powerful or important to the story.
I mean, he's like godlike in the Zack Snyder version.
Yeah, that's that because that's Zack Zack Snyder's whole thing is that they're all gods.
Right.
And I don't feel like this version feels like that in any way. I'm not really sure. I mean, the comics have kind of taken his power kind of more up to that level in more recent years, but I don't think it was necessarily like that originally. That's a tough call. I guess I would put this in the lead maybe, but it's not like overwhelmingly really.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because I totally forgot to mention another version of him too. Another show that you and I cover on here, Young Justice, there's a cyborg on there too.
Yes, from the last season, yeah.
And I would say that this version of Cyborg and that version are probably the two closest out of all the different versions.
Yes, and I'm already just getting flashbacks of the scene of the explosion from the cartoon and how graphic that was.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Once again, HBO Max, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, we can do it. Let's be graphic. Yeah. So there are other supporting characters that we see. We see Niles Calder, where they were able to snag Timothy Dalton to play this character, and that's a freaking catch and a half right there. By the end of season 2, Niles dies, and so tonight we're going to talk about just how season 2 ends and the first 2 episodes, and then we're just going to cover season 3 over the next couple of weeks. So, Brian, you were saying that season 2 got they like ended it early because of COVID, right?
That is correct. So season 2 is supposed to have 10 episodes. COVID struck mid-filming of the finale of season of episode 10, and they kind of just wrapped it up at 9. They, for the most, I mean, they absolutely wrap up the story in season 1 of episode. I'm sorry, episode 1 of season 3. But it does feel kind of rushed, I'd say.
Yeah.
It seems like they just took the leftover the footage they had of the episode and just tacked it on to what their normal premiere would have been. So I feel like they didn't go back and film anything extra. They just realized that they couldn't have used what they had to make a full episode out of.
Yeah. Season 3, the very first episode, which is called Possibilities Patrol, totally feels like that would have been the last episode of season 2, because essentially it's like kind of like the epilogue of what happened. I mean, the chief dies at the very end of season 2. He has this daughter Dorothy, and Dorothy is like the mix of him and this woman that's sort of like almost like a Neanderthal type woman. And Dorothy has this incredible power to where she can like summon creatures from her imagination, one of which is the Candle Maker, which is this big giant sort of, he looks kind of like Lumiere from Beauty and the Beast, but like evil, right?
That's a great analogy.
Thanks, man. And like he just has this ability to where like he could just put candle wax, like essentially like bukkake the whole world, just everything just covered in candle wax. And I didn't want to talk about the season finale too much, but one thing that I truly loved about the season finale is when he starts to do that, when the candle maker starts covering everything with wax, he makes all of the imaginary friends of the Doom Patrol come and fight them. And their friends, it's so funny, each one, especially Cliff's.
Yeah, I was going to say Cliff's one was the best because it was a cursing Jesus. From it was his imaginary friend for a summer when he was in Bible camp.
Yeah, like Jesus rips off his arm and beats him with his arm, and some of the things that Jesus says to is just so funny. I wanted to point out one thing about this show, that the showrunner is Jeremy Carver, okay? And Jeremy Carver has worked on a whole bunch of different shows, but where he started was on Supernatural. And I looked at his list of episodes that he's written, and he's written a lot of those like funny Supernatural episodes. You know, like the ones where they kind of, might be on a TV show, or like there's that rest stop one where they die all the time. And I feel like this show is almost like just a whole season of that type of Supernatural episode,
Yeah, like the really, really weird ones, yeah.
Right, the weird, funny, that's what Doom Patrol is. Yeah. And so, like, when they're fighting their imaginary friends, I'm like, that's just like when Supernatural just goes nuts,
Yeah.
It's this kind of fusion of like Grant Morrison's weird ass ideas and then those absurd Supernatural episodes just together. And Cyborg his dad always plays a big part in his origin and his story. And so his dad is on the show too, and he's like a cowboy, right? He's like some kind of weird Dr. Cowboy. That's his imaginary friend. And then like
and really, I really wanted to point out the how tragic that is, that his imaginary friend was a self-created father figure that looked like his dad, that was like what was it, Dr. Cowboy, right?
Dr. Cowboy, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, and he even admits to him, like Dr. Cowboy says to him, like, you created me as a self-affirmation. It's like, holy crap, that is so sad.
Yeah.
Like that really like hit hard for some reason.
Yeah. Every character on the show is just so freaking depressing, their backstories. And Cyborg inherently is a depressing character no matter what, just because of his origin and his dad. Yeah. But I thought the guy that played his dad did an awesome job in that scene. And then with Rita, they had this really cool thing where like essentially like it looked like almost like a collage come to life, and it was moving. It was like essentially like a woman she cut out of a magazine, and I think like the picture of her mom's glasses from like a photo, and it would like move and talk to her. And it just, this show is just so out there and creative that it just kind of seems like they could just do whatever they want,
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't expect to see or to work on in live action, but does.
Right. Yeah, and so the Doom Patrol, they get beaten up by their imaginary friends. Dorothy is going to have to confront the Candlemaker, and she does. But ultimately, throughout the whole course of the battle, it's too much for the chief, and he dies. And so
you have to keep in mind that the chief was also extra old. He was about 100 years old or so, or 90 years old, and he had a talisman that was helping him keep him young, that he had to give to Willoughby Kipling, who was a John Constantine knockoff played by Supernatural and Battlestar Galactica and alum Mark Shepard. And he had to give that up in order to save someone or maybe even the entire team at some point in the end of season 2, near the end of season 2. So that's kind of why his death was accelerated, or his aging was accelerated, towards the end of the season.
Yeah, the reason why he gave up that talisman was because the team had been shrunken to like action figure size.
Yes,
and so to make them get large again, he had to give up that talisman. But that's once again just an example of how fucking cuckoo bananas this show could be, because like they're just living in like a little model town, and Robot Man's picking fights with rats and stuff. Just
that's right.
Such imagination. It's so great.
Yeah, so you're a little fresher on season 2 than I am, so.
Yeah, it's all good. But we're going to be on the same level for season 3 now. So for season 3, we get introduced to the Brotherhood of Evil, right? So what do you know about the Brotherhood of Evil?
Not much. I recognize the character names. That's about it. So like I knew Living Brain, I knew Monsieur Mallah, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And that's only because I've seen them in other media before.
Right.
Yeah.
Monsieur Mallah, didn't he look fucking awesome for a fucking talking gorilla? Yeah. And then the Brain was great too. I was wondering, was Monsieur Mallah, was he voiced by what's his face? The guy that does Mr. Crab or whatever from SpongeBob, and Clancy Brown, right? He sounded a lot like Clancy Brown.
I don't know. I feel like Clancy Brown has definitely done a gorilla character somewhere for DC before, but
in the Justice League cartoon, they had I think Monsieur Mallah was on there too, but they had the Ultra Humanite. No, Gorilla Grodd. They have so many fucking gorilla characters.
They probably had both, honestly, at various points.
Yeah, it sounded like that voice when it was Monsieur Mallah talking, but by the time we come along with episode 1 of season 3, you also get Madame. Now, it's Madame Rouge, right? Not Madame Rogue.
It's ROU, so Rouge, yeah.
Yeah, Madame Rouge. So Madame Rouge she's kind of interesting because she's kind of like the same thing as Rita Farr, but like an evil version of her,
Yes.
Where she's got like the elastic kind of Reed Richards powers. And she's played by this actress who Michelle Gomez, that was not the doctor, the master on Doctor Who, like a female version of him, and she was fantastic. And like I just thought when I found out that she was cast as Madame Rouge, I was like, oh, that's perfect, very good casting. You know?
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with her before, but I mean, she looked important.
Yeah. And she looked.
But yeah, an evil version, an evil power set of Rita Farr seems pretty appropriate.
Yeah. And essentially, what's happened with this third season is the chief has made Rita the new head of the Doom Patrol, and so she has to kind of take over, and they have to kind of confront any kind of crazy otherworldly dangers. And Madame Rouge comes back. It seems like she's been gone. Now, in the Wikipedia, it said that she was in a time machine. It sure looked like she was like in a kind of like an underground drill machine.
Yeah,
so I don't underground. Yeah, wherever she was, she's been gone for decades since the Brotherhood of Evil fought the Doom Patrol.
Yes, because the flashback they had was from in episode 2, was I believe in the late 40s.
Okay.
And then later on, there was a newspaper headline about how the Doom Patrol defeats the Brotherhood of Evil. So, in I want to say the 60s or the 70s, maybe.
Yeah. And so, what's funny about the second episode, which is called VACAY Patrol, is that you have this one character called Gargawax, the Decimator. This like green alien. He kind of looks like Brainiac. But he's supposed to take out Rita Farr. Like the Brotherhood of Evil are like, hey, you got to get rid of her. And he goes and he stays in this lodge, and he's just there for like decades, right?
Yeah, just waiting for instruction. He stays there, and it's just kind of another parallel. It's just a character that doesn't really age the same way.
Right. Yeah.
Because he's an alien. And, I found him to be a very relatable villain. He was very like chill guy,
Yeah.
I was so impressed by or surprised by the turn where it's like, you know what? Like they're just sad people like I am. Like they're not going to hurt anybody. Why are we still doing this? And it was his little angry assistant who was frustrated that eventually attacks them anyway.
Yeah. He has his little henchman that you're talking about, Samuelson.
Yes.
He goes around and he plays like one of those like old fashioned fucking record players that has like the big like whatever the fuck you call it, that
phonograph thing, yeah.
Right. And it's playing this music that's from the movie Excalibur, this like classic piece of music every time that Gargawax comes in.
I didn't realize it was from Excalibur. That's a good catch.
Don't you love that movie too?
Yeah.
From like that movie's so fucking good. But it's like this classic German piece of like orchestral music, and they play every time he comes into a room. And the guy that played Samuelson, that's Pippin from Lord of the Rings.
Oh, no way. Okay.
Yeah,
I can hear that now. Yeah.
So what you just mentioned was that Samuelson, he gets a signal from the Brotherhood, which is probably going to be Madame Rouge giving him the signal. And he takes this laser, Gargawax's laser, and it kills Gargawax. And then apparently by the end of the episode, it looks like he killed off the Doom Patrol too. Yeah, that just kind of goes along with what I was saying before. What's that?
I was just agreeing. Yeah,
it just kind of goes along with what I was saying, where it's like the Doom Patrol dies all the time, and it sure looked like that, like where they just all got blasted,
Yeah.
So I'm assuming they'll be back though, because it's only episode 2 of season 3.
Yeah, they can't kill off the whole team and just leave Larry and Dorothy to carry on after.
Yeah. So, just like real quick, why don't we just kind of talk about where each of the main characters are? Jane, she had a girl switch out with her. Jane is like the primary personality of this little girl who's grown up, and like she's trying to like keep the little girl safe. There was another personality that took over for a little while, but then it turned Miranda was the personality. But then you found out that it wasn't even really a personality. It was like kind of like the corruption of the father,
Yeah, it was the manifestation of her fear and despair from the trauma from her father, which they seemingly overcame again. But it's always possible it might resurface at a later time.
Yeah. And so Jane
and that actually that manifestation of Miranda, besides Miranda being actually gone, the real Miranda, they took out a couple other personalities too, including Baby Doll, right?
Yeah, Baby Doll got killed. Yeah, in season 2. Yeah, by the Candlemaker.
Yeah.
So Jane, though, Miranda was much better at like kind of working with the team when she took over, and she was much more like relatable. Jane is always kind of taking a step back, and her personality is very abrasive. But there was this one part in the end of episode 2 where they start playing Forever Young, right? Is that Alphaville, right? I think.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, and so they're playing Forever Young by Alphaville, and everybody's dancing. And I just thought that was I almost cried because I thought it was just a really great.
I was gonna say the same thing, man. That scene just hit me for some reason.
Yeah.
It's just again shared trauma. All these people have shared trauma, and they're all living really long times. So it just really hit for some reason.
Yeah. If you're at season 3 of this show, you're at this point because you love these characters. And so just all of them kind of coming together. It's kind of ironic because they kind of join hands, they dance in sync with each other. And then when they get shot by Samuelson, they're all kind of still holding each other's hands, even though they're like dead on the floor,
Yeah.
But with Cliff, we found out that his daughter is going to have a baby. She has a wife, and they have a baby. And then Cliff goes and takes care of the baby. But we also find out that his issues that he thought were with his robot body are perhaps because he might have Parkinson's. The only fucking human piece of him is his brain, and it's possible that he has Parkinson's disease.
It's just, and again, we mentioned earlier that they find unique ways to reinterpret the trauma or add layers to their existing trauma, and like, how do you get worse than that? Like the one part of him that still exists could potentially like break down and not work properly.
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to get out of this one, but it seems like he's kind of overbearing with his granddaughter and his daughter too, and it's sort of getting on the wife's nerves. But it's just great to kind of see him be happy because he's with his kid that he hasn't been with his whole life. Yeah. And then Rita is kind of reluctant to take over the team, and she spends most of episode 2 just like in a bucket or like a bag,
literally in like a tablecloth, which she somehow turns into like a really amazing looking dress.
Right. Yeah. At one point, she's like drinking alcohol from a straw, but she's just like a glob in a tablecloth. Yeah. And then Cyborg, he had this relationship with this woman who actually had like cyborg enhancements put on her and they had a relationship in the previous season. I think she's pretty much gone by this season, but I don't know if she's going to come back or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, he still seems to hung up on her. He's trying to. I mean, one of the most tragic things I think in the second episode is when they're all kind of off on their own, depressed, and he's trying to text her with his flip phone. Cyborg is trying to text someone with a flip phone.
Right.
Oh my god! Like how how far have you fallen? Kind of thing. That's gotta hurt, man.
Yeah. He's such a cool character in some regard because he's got this cool tech. But then, just like all the other characters, he's kind of pathetic too. Everybody's kind of pathetic, but that just makes us like him more, And like I said, probably the most pathetic is Larry. And by the end of the second season, he's starting to make this kind of connection with his negative spirit that's inside of him. And you think that maybe he might have a bond and might be able to kind of like evolve. But then by the end of this episode, him and the negative spirit are like separated. So I don't know what's going to happen with that.
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing is the interesting layer they added to it was that in season 2, I believe it was season 2, he met someone else that was possessed by one of the negative spirits, and they kind of became one. And after in a very short period of time, and he's kind of like, well, what the fuck? Like, why can't we do this? So he kind of flies off into space at the behest of the negative spirit, and he gets grabbed by some floaty hand thing, and then he sees some vision of himself, and then suddenly he's back. So we really don't know what the hell happened there.
Yeah, and I guess we'll have to find out. We'll have to find out, is the Doom Patrol alive? Or are they dead? How are they going to come back? How's Larry going to get connected to his spirit again? And that character that you referenced, that's a character that's in the Doom Patrol comics too. There is like a female, there's like a negative woman. And I think at some point, whether it's Grant Morrison's run or Gerard Way's run, or maybe even some run between, I think Larry Trainer becomes a woman. Like it's like a transgender thing that happens too.
Yeah, he gets merged with another character. I don't think it's that same character that we just referenced. I don't remember her name.
Her name is like Moscow, which is like
it Moscow? Yeah.
I'm almost afraid to say, like, consider what's going on in our world right now.
Very true. So in the comic, he and his other female character and the Negative Spirit merge into one character called Rebus.
Okay, there you
very weird name.
Yeah.
But yes, he takes on features of both personalities. So yes.
And that's the kind of the amazing thing, and maybe that's kind of a good point to kind of wrap everything up, is that like the inspiration for this show essentially comes from the Grant Morrison comics. And Grant Morrison, at this point, when you talk about Grant Morrison, you say they or them. You know, Grant Morrison for a long time was he, but he himself, you know, is non-binary, or they are non-binary. But Grant Morrison has always been like forward-thinking and like thinking outside of the box. And when the Doom Patrol comic came out that he wrote, it had stuff that just was like so ahead of its time that nowadays it looks like it's almost kind of commonplace and stuff. But you know, you had characters with all these different kind of tragic, traumatic backstories, and people with like issues with their bodies and not want to be in their bodies, and transgender characters and people with mental illness. And I think that the show, as bizarre and weird as it is not necessarily as like out there and far-fetched as Grant Morrison, but I think it's as good as you could potentially get for like a live action adaptation.
Yeah, I agree. And I know you mentioned that how there are probably a lot more things that feel similar to Grant Morrison stuff, but I still think there's some unique quality to the way, like, absolutely outside of the box is the best term you can use when describing his work. So definitely.
Yeah, I went ahead and I ordered the Doom Patrol comics from the 80s because I knew we were going to be talking about this. I read a little bit of them, but I want to like go through the whole run. And then, of course, the lead singer of My Chemical Romance, Gerard Way, he took over the Doom Patrol comic, you know, maybe like 6 years ago or even more. And so I'm going to read some of that too. But if you guys haven't read either of those books and you like the show, I definitely recommend you guys checking them out. So, Brian, next week, are we just doing 3 and 4?
Up to you, because we're also going to cover the Boys animated spinoff too.
Okay, so next week, let's do 3 and 4 of Doom Patrol, and then we'll cover that Boys show, and then I think we'll do 5 and 6, and then whatever. We'll just be covering the Doom Patrol and the Boys for a while until
Moon Knight comes out.
Exactly. Cool. And Brian, I think. Go ahead.
Oh, and there's a few more points I wanted to touch on the show too before we jump off of it.
Okay, go ahead.
End of season 2. There's a shot of Niles when he's crawling towards Dorothy, and he opens a case that has a syringe. They don't follow up on that. I'm very curious what that was, what it meant, and what he was planning to do, and if it will show up again. 2, did you see the end credit scene, the post credit scene in episode 1 of season 3?
Wait, episode 1 of season 3? I did not. No, but
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is interesting. So in episode 1 of season 3, Niles comes back as a ghost. He manifests himself and he talks to Cliff, and then you see him, and you know that Dorothy rides Danny the ambulance back to where she was born and to bury him. So you see Niles as a ghost, and he's just sitting in the house there. And you see the sex ghosts pop up from the previous episode, and they're beckoning him to come join them. And he says, okay, why not? So he starts undoing his shirt, and then his ghost gets ripped away. And then they cut to his gravesite, and you see Willoughby Kipling has dug up his grave and severed his head. And something is going to happen with that.
Yeah, I totally did not see that when that happened, but I did read on like the Wikipedia. Kipling says something like, your story's not done or something like that, right?
Yes. Yeah. So
yeah.
I'm very curious to see where that goes to.
Yeah, well, you brought up the sex ghost too, man. So I feel like
Man, that was the
messaged,
weirdest episode.
yes, I messaged Brian. One of the episodes was called Sex Patrol. And what I loved was that I froze HBO Max one time when my daughter was walking into the room. And so right on the HBO Max, it says Sex Patrol. It's like, oh, that's what my father's watching. That's cool. But I remember like messaging Brian and being like, I think I'm losing my mind, like watching this episode. It was so fucking bizarre. You know? At one point,
there's like a baby that comes at the end too. It's real out there.
Yeah. I need to like just have this documented that I saw this with my eyeballs. But at one point, there's like this like sex pervert demon that like seems to be a man, but it gives birth, and there's a floating baby, and then Jane takes the baby and shoves it up wherever it came out of. Yeah, it's just the weirdest fucking thing. But yeah, but that's how great this fucking show is. I'm like, did she just shove a baby back into the man? You know?
Yeah. It's just things from a comic you didn't think would work that work.
Right.
And I'm so glad this show exists.
Yes, yeah. Did you have any other things from the show?
I think that was it. I just wanted to cover those two things because I think they're going to come back up later on.
Okay. Yeah, as long as they bring back some sex ghosts, I was appreciating that. But anyway, yeah. So we are going to talk about Doom Patrol for the next couple of weeks, and then Moon Knight will be on March 30th. But Brian, there's a movie coming out this weekend too.
Oh, I got my tickets.
Me too. What are your tickets for?
Wait, what are my tickets for or when?
When?
Saturday afternoon.
Okay. So yeah, I think maybe we could do a video on Sunday. We'll see. Yeah, we'll work it out schedule wise.
I can do that.
Yeah, man. Okay, cool. All right. Well, so that's me and Brian, and we'll see you guys here for Batman, and then of course some more Doom Patrol.